The blue marble turned slowly in the darkness of space. Its surface swirled with white clouds and brown patches of land. Vex watched from the observation deck of his ship, his crystalline body pulsing with dim purple light as he studied the primitive world below. 3 billion years his people had ruled the galaxy, and in all that time, no species had surprised them. This little planet would be no different. His scanner officer Nira approached with quiet steps, her smaller frame glowing soft yellow with excitement. She carried a datapad filled with weeks of observation records about the creatures living on the third planet from their sun. The beings called themselves humans, and they had been broadcasting radio signals into space for barely a century. "What do your studies tell us about these animals?" Vex asked without turning from the window. His voice carried the cold authority that had made him commander of 17 successful. Planetary CLEANINGS.NIR activated her pad and began reading her report. They are mammals that walk upright on 2 legs. Average height is about 6 feet with soft skin and no natural weapons or armor. They live approximately 70 to 80 of their solar cycles before dying of age. Vex nodded as he continued. Watching the planet rotate. Physical capabilities? Weak compared to most species we have encountered. They cannot lift more than their own body weight without mechanical assistance. Their bones break easily under stress. They require 8 hours of unconsciousness daily to function properly. They must consume food and water constantly, or they die within days. The commander's light pulsed brighter with amusement. Every conquered species had been weak, but these humans seemed particularly fragile. What about their technology? Nira scrolled through more data. Primitive chemical rockets that can barely escape their gravity well. Metal vehicles that burn fossil fuels for transportation. Simple electronics based on moving electrons through silicon. They only developed atomic weapons in the last century, and their most powerful computers are less advanced than our basic scanners. Weapons? Mostly projectile-based. They fire small metal pellets using controlled explosions. Some explosive devices, but nothing that could threaten our shields. Their largest weapons could not penetrate even our transport ships. Vex finally turned from the observation window, his 7-foot frame casting long shadows across the deck. And their social structure? This question made Nira's light flicker with confusion. This is where their behavior becomes unusual, Commander. They have divided themselves into nearly 200 separate tribal groups they call nations. These groups frequently fight each other over resources, territory, and ideological differences. Standard territorial behavior for a primitive species. Yes, but ... Nira hesitated, her light dimming. They also cooperate in ways that make no logical sense. During natural disasters, they send aid to their enemies. They have organizations that provide medical care to anyone regardless of tribal affiliation. Some humans even sacrifice their lives to save strangers from other tribes. Vex dismissed this with a wave of his long blade-like fingers. Aberrant behavior. Perhaps some form of mental illness that affects a small portion of their population. Nira wanted to argue but knew better than to question her commander's judgment. She had documented thousands of these aberrant behaviors over the past month of observation. Humans running into burning structures to save trapped individuals. Humans sharing food with hungry strangers. Humans working without payment to help their communities. None of it made evolutionary sense. "What is your recommendation?" Vex asked as he moved toward the command center. Standard cleansing protocol should be sufficient. Their weapons cannot harm our ships, their technology is centuries behind ours, and their scattered tribal structure prevents unified resistance. Estimated time for complete planetary clearing is 6 months. The command center hummed with activity, as dozens of officers prepared for another routine conquest. The Threnody Empire had perfected the art of planetary acquisition over millennia. First, they would demand surrender and offer the natives a chance to serve as workers in their mining operations. When the inevitable refusal came, they would demonstrate their superior firepower by destroying a few population centers. Most species surrendered immediately after this show of force. For the stubborn ones who continued to resist, the Empire would begin systematic elimination of all major settlements. They had never encountered a species that could withstand this phase for more than a few months. Once the native population was reduced to scattered survivors, mining operations could begin in earnest. Vex settled into his command chair and activated the communication array. Prepare the surrender broadcast. Standard protocol translated into their dominant languages. The message was simple and had been used on countless worlds before. Inhabitants of the third planet, you are now under the protection of the Threnody Empire. Cease all military activities and prepare for integration into our civilization. You have 72 of your hours to comply. Resistance will result in immediate termination of your species. As the message was transmitted toward Earth, Vex felt the familiar satisfaction of another successful hunt beginning. These humans would follow the same pattern as every other species: initial defiance, followed by desperate attempts at negotiation, then inevitable surrender when faced with overwhelming force. But Nira remained troubled as she watched the planet below. During her weeks of observation, she had seen something that didn't fit any pattern in the Empire's xenobiology database. When humans faced danger, many of them moved toward it rather than away from it, especially when others needed help. When humans saw suffering, they often took actions that put themselves at risk to reduce that suffering. Even for strangers, she had recorded footage of human parents dying to protect children who shared no genetic relationship with them. She had documented humans jumping into dangerous water to save drowning strangers. She had watched humans run toward explosions and fires when others were trapped inside. The Empire's scientists had long ago concluded that all intelligent species were fundamentally selfish, because selfishness was required for evolutionary survival. Only species that put their own survival first could develop enough to reach technological advancement. The data from every conquered world had supported this theory, yet humans seemed to have reached space travel while retaining behaviors that should have caused their extinction millions of years ago. They helped their weak instead of abandoning them. They shared resources with those who had nothing to offer in return. They mourned their dead instead of simply replacing them. As the surrender deadline approached, Nira found herself hoping these strange creatures would be smart enough to submit peacefully. Something told her that if they chose to fight, this cleansing might not follow the standard pattern. The humans might surprise everyone, including themselves, with what they were truly capable of when pushed to their absolute limits. General Adams stared at the massive ship hanging over Manhattan like a dark storm cloud. 3 identical vessels had appeared simultaneously above New York, London, and Tokyo exactly 71 hours ago, their alien message still echoing in his mind. Now the deadline was almost up, and the world held its breath. The alien ships were beautiful in a terrifying way, their crystalline hulls catching sunlight and throwing rainbows across the city below. Each vessel stretched nearly 2 miles long, with elegant curves that seemed grown rather than built. No human technology could create anything so graceful or massive. "Sir, we have the Moscow conference call ready," his aide announced from the packed command center they had hastily established in the Pentagon basement. Around him, officers from every nation worked side by side, sharing intelligence and coordinating responses with former enemies turned desperate allies. The wall screen flickered to life, showing faces from around the world. President Martinez spoke first from her bunker beneath Washington. "General, what's our status on the Joint Defense Plan?" Adams checked his tablet, still amazed at how quickly the world had come together. All participating nations have shared their military technology and positioning. The Russians gave us their new missile designs. The Chinese opened their satellite networks, and the Europeans are coordinating air defenses. We have more international cooperation right now than in all of recorded history. Foreign Minister Chun from Beijing leaned forward. "Our scientists have been studying the alien ships with every instrument we have. Their hulls seem to be made of some kind of living crystal that absorbs most forms of energy we direct at it. What about their weapons? Asked Prime Minister Davis from London. Unknown, but we have to assume they're beyond anything we can defend against, Adams replied honestly. Our best strategy is to make any invasion as costly as possible while we work on understanding their technology. The deadline arrived with no fanfare. Adams watched the countdown reach 0 on his screen, then looked up at the monitors showing the alien ships. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then beams of blue light began scanning the cities below. The first attack came without warning. A pulse of energy erupted from the ship over London, striking the Thames and instantly vaporizing a square mile of water. The steam cloud rose like a nuclear explosion. And the message was clear, this was just a demonstration. Adams grabbed his radio as reports flooded in from around the world. Similar displays of power had occurred over all 3 cities, each one carefully aimed at empty areas to minimize casualties while maximizing psychological impact. The aliens were showing restraint, still hoping for surrender, but instead of panic, something unexpected happened. In London, emergency crews rushed toward the blast zone to help anyone who might have been injured. In Tokyo, civilians began evacuating hospitals and schools in orderly lines while volunteers directed traffic. In New York, construction workers started reinforcing subway tunnels to serve as bomb shelters. "Sir, we're getting reports from all major cities," his communications officer announced. Mass mobilization of civilian volunteers. Food distribution. Networks being established. Medical personnel reporting to hospitals worldwide. It's like the entire planet is preparing for war. Adams felt a strange mixture of pride and terror. Humanity was showing its best face to the universe, even as that universe prepared to destroy them. Send the message to all commands. Commence. Operation Defiance. The human response surprised everyone, including the humans themselves. Instead of surrendering or panicking, every nation began implementing emergency plans that had been developed in just 3 days of unprecedented cooperation. Military forces that had been enemies for decades now coordinated attacks on the alien ships. Fighter pilot Rick Peterson climbed into his F-22 Raptor, knowing he was probably flying toward his death. Around him, aircraft from 12 different nations prepared for takeoff. Russian pilots flew beside Americans, Chinese beside Japanese, Indians beside Pakistanis. The alien threat had erased borders overnight. "This is Alpha Leader to all squadrons," Rick announced over the radio as they approached the ship over New York. "Remember, we're not trying to win this fight. We're trying to learn everything we can about their defenses and buy time for the scientists." The alien ship didn't move as the fighters approached. Its shields shimmered like a soap bubble, beautiful and seemingly delicate. Rick armed his missiles and selected his target, a point near what looked like a sensor array. "Fox. 3, missiles away," he called as 6 advanced missiles streaked toward the alien vessel. The other fighters followed suit. Filling the air with humanity's best weapons, every missile simply vanished as it touched the ship's shields, absorbed without a trace of explosion or damage. But the fighters had expected this. Their real purpose was to test the aliens' responses and gather data. The alien ship finally reacted, firing thin beams of energy that cut through the air like lasers. But instead of vaporizing the human aircraft, the beams seemed designed to disable rather than destroy. Several fighters lost power and began gliding toward emergency landings, their pilots unharmed. Rick watched his fuel gauge and made a decision. That would be remembered forever. His fighter was already damaged from a glancing blow, losing altitude rapidly. Below him, Central Park was filled with families who had refused to evacuate, instead choosing to watch humanity's first battle with aliens. "This is Alpha Leader," he announced calmly over the radio. "I'm going to see if their shields work both ways." He pushed his dying fighter into a steep dive directly toward the alien ship. The crystalline hull grew larger in his windscreen as he accelerated past the sound barrier. At the last second, Rick ejected, but his fighter continued its kamikaze run. The F-22 struck the alien shields and passed right through them, slamming into the ship's hull with the force of a meteor. For the first time, the alien vessel shuddered and began to list to one side. Debris fell from the impact site, proving that the ships could be damaged. Rick landed hard in Central Park, his parachute tangled in a tree. As he hung there, bleeding from several cuts, a group of children ran toward him despite the danger still hanging overhead. An elderly woman reached him first, checking his injuries with gentle hands. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," she told him as she helped him out of his harness. Similar scenes played out around the world. Human forces threw everything they had at the alien ships, taking terrible casualties but learning valuable lessons. The aliens' weapons seemed designed to minimize deaths rather than maximize them. Their shields could be penetrated by physical objects traveling fast enough. Most importantly, they seemed genuinely surprised by the level of human resistance. In the alien ship over New York, Commander Thex studied the damage reports with growing concern. The human attack had been primitive and suicidal, but it had also been more effective than it should have been. More troubling was the behavior of the humans themselves. "They're not fighting like any species we've encountered," Nira reported, her light flickering with confusion. "They're taking actions that guarantee their own deaths just to gather information for others. These kamikaze attacks serve no logical purpose for individual survival." Vex reviewed the footage of the fighter pilot's sacrifice. The human had ejected at the last possible moment, suggesting he valued his own life, but he had still chosen certain death to damage their ship. "Perhaps they're more desperate than we calculated." But Nira had been watching other human responses as well. Medical teams were treating injured aliens alongside injured humans in the hospitals below. Civilian volunteers were bringing food and water to crashed alien scouts, even though those same aliens had been shooting at human aircraft hours earlier. "Commander, I think we may have misjudged these creatures," she said carefully. "Their behavior patterns don't match any known evolutionary model. They're simultaneously more violent and more compassionate than any species should be able to survive being." Vex dismissed her concerns with a gesture, but privately he was beginning to worry. The humans had already proven they wouldn't surrender easily, and their strange willingness to sacrifice themselves was making this conquest far more costly than anticipated. Worse yet, some of his own younger officers were asking uncomfortable questions about why they were killing beings who showed mercy to their enemies. The war was just beginning, but already it was changing everyone involved in ways no one had expected. Teacher Tom Mitchell swept broken glass from his makeshift classroom, using a damaged broom he had found in the rubble. 3 months had passed since the aliens arrived, and half of Detroit lay in ruins, but 37 children still gathered here each morning to learn mathematics and reading. Some had lost their parents to the bombardments, others were refugees from destroyed neighborhoods. But all of them needed to believe that tomorrow still mattered. The school had taken a direct hit 2 weeks ago, but Tom and the surviving staff had simply moved classes to the basement of a nearby church. When that building was damaged, they relocated to an abandoned warehouse. Education continued because someone had to prepare these children for whatever world would exist after the war ended. "Today we're going to learn about percentages," Tom announced to his mixed-age class of students ranging from 6 to 16 years old. He used chunks of concrete as counting tools, making lessons from the destruction around them. "If we have 20 pieces of rubble and we need to clear away 60% of them, how many pieces is that?" 12-year-old Amy raised her hand, her face still bearing a bandage from the latest attack. 12 pieces, Mr. Tom." "Excellent. And why is this important to know?" "Because when we rebuild the city, we need to know how much material we have to work with," replied 16-year-old David, who had been helping clear debris from the streets every afternoon after class ended. High above them, intelligence officer. Nira watched this scene through her surveillance equipment, her crystalline body pulsing with confused yellow light. She had been documenting human behavior in occupied territories for weeks now, and nothing made sense according to established xenobiology principles. This teacher should have fled the city when the bombardments began. Instead, he had stayed to care for children who weren't even his own offspring. He shared his food rations with students who had none, slept on the floor so the children could have the mattresses, and spent his free time searching through rubble for books and school supplies. Last week, Nira had watched Tom carry an injured alien scout to safety after a building collapse. The young Threnody soldier had been trapped under debris for hours, and Tom could have simply left him to die. Instead, the human teacher had risked his own life to dig the enemy free, then used his medical training to treat the alien's wounds. When other humans arrived and wanted to take the injured alien prisoner, Tom had stood between them and insisted that wounded beings deserve care regardless of which side they fought for. He had personally escorted the recovered scout to the edge of the city and released him. Unharmed, Nira surveillance had captured thousands of similar incidents across all the occupied territories. Humans continued behaving in ways that defied evolutionary logic, even as their species faced extinction. In the medical district, Nurse Beth Williams worked 18-hour shifts treating anyone who came through the emergency room doors. Her hospital had been converted into a combined human-alien medical facility after several alien soldiers were brought in wounded by human civilians. Beth treated Threnody injuries with the same care she gave to human patients, despite losing her husband and daughter to an alien bombing raid. The liver equivalent in their species is located in the upper thorax, she explained to her medical students as they worked on an unconscious alien fighter pilot. The bioluminescent patterns indicate pain levels so we can adjust medication accordingly. Her students watched in amazement as their teacher worked to save the life of a being whose people had destroyed their city. When asked why she bothered treating enemies, Beth had simply replied that her oath to do no harm didn't include exceptions for species or nationality. At the military command center, Colonel Stone reviewed intelligence reports with growing frustration. The aliens had superior technology and firepower, but their tactics seemed almost restrained. Their weapons were clearly capable of destroying entire cities in minutes, yet they continued using precision strikes that minimized civilian casualties. They're not fighting a war of extermination, Stone told his staff during their daily briefing. They're fighting a war of conquest. They want the planet intact and the population reduced but not eliminated. His analysis was interrupted by alarms throughout the command center. Alien forces were approaching their hidden facility, somehow having located their underground complex. Within minutes, the bunker was surrounded and Stone's entire command staff was captured without a shot being fired. The interrogation facility was unlike anything in human experience. The aliens didn't use torture or violence, instead relying on some form of mind-scanning technology that could read surface thoughts. Colonel Stone found himself sitting across from a tall, graceful alien whose bioluminescent patterns shifted through various colors as they spoke. "You are the military leader of this region's resistance," the alien stated rather than asked. "We require information about your defensive positions and weapon capabilities." Stone remained silent, having prepared for this possibility. His mind focused on random memories, childhood birthdays, favorite foods, old movies, anything to avoid revealing strategic information. The alien interrogator seemed puzzled by Stone's mental discipline. "You are experiencing significant physical discomfort from your recent injuries, yet you refuse medical treatment until your soldiers are also treated. This behavior is unusual." Through the transparent walls of his cell, Stone could see other captured humans being processed. Most were civilians who had been caught providing food and shelter to military units. The aliens seemed genuinely confused about how to classify non-combatants who actively supported the war effort. On the third day of his imprisonment, Stone heard commotion in the corridor outside his cell. A young alien guard had collapsed, his bioluminescent patterns flickering erratically. Stone recognized the symptoms immediately, the alien equivalent of appendicitis. Based on medical intelligence they had gathered from previous encounters, without thinking, Stone called out to the other guards, "Your friend is having an internal organ failure. If you don't operate within the next hour, he'll die." The senior guard approached Stone's cell cautiously. "You have knowledge of our physiology?" "Enough to save his life." Your species has a redundant filtration organ in the lower abdomen that sometimes becomes infected. It needs to be removed surgically. Stone was escorted under heavy guard to the prison medical facility, where he worked alongside alien doctors to save the young guard's life. His human medical training, combined with alien surgical tools, proved effective. The operation was successful, and the guard named Kess would make a full recovery as Stone was returned to his cell. Kess managed to whisper a weak "thank you" in broken English. The human colonel had saved the life of his captor, someone who represented everything he was fighting against, simply because it was the right thing to do. This incident was reported up the chain of command, eventually reaching Commander Vex himself. The Threnody leader studied the report with growing unease. His forces were documenting hundreds of similar incidents every day. Humans helping their enemies, sharing resources with strangers, risking their lives for abstract principles like justice and mercy. These behaviors should have been eliminated by natural selection millions of years ago, Vex told Nira during their daily briefing. How did they survive long enough to develop space travel while retaining such self-destructive traits? Nira had been asking herself the same question. Her research had revealed something troubling about the Empire's previous conquests. Every other species they had encountered had been fundamentally selfish, caring only about their own survival and the survival of their immediate genetic relatives. This had made them predictable and ultimately conquerable, but humans seemed to have evolved a different survival strategy entirely. They had succeeded as a species not by being stronger or smarter than their competitors, but by working together and caring for each other in ways that multiplied their collective strength. Even now, facing extinction, they continued cooperating with each other and showing compassion to their enemies. "Commander," Nira said carefully, "I believe we may need to reconsider our approach to this conquest. These humans are not responding to our tactics the way previous species have. They're adapting and evolving their resistance faster than we can counter it." Vex's bioluminescent patterns flashed with irritation. "They are primitives with inferior technology. We have conquered civilizations far more advanced than this one." "Yes, but those civilizations were advanced in technology while remaining primitive in social cooperation. The humans have achieved the opposite, relatively simple technology supported by incredibly sophisticated social structures. They're fighting us not as individuals but as a unified organism." As if to prove her point, reports began flooding in from across the planet. Human resistance cells were sharing captured alien technology instantaneously across all continents. Scientific breakthroughs made in one location were being implemented globally within days. The humans were learning from every encounter, spreading knowledge faster than the aliens could suppress it. Most disturbing of all, some Threnody soldiers were beginning to question their mission after extended contact with human prisoners. The Empire's rigid hierarchy had never prepared them for enemies who showed kindness to their captors, who taught alien children alongside their own, who mourned their dead while caring for their living enemies. The war was changing everyone involved, but perhaps it was changing the aliens more than the humans. Dr. Williams sat in her prison cell reading a book about philosophy that one of the alien guards had brought her. 6 months of war had taught humanity many things about their captors, but perhaps the most surprising was that young Threnody. Soldiers were hungry for new ideas and ways of thinking that their rigid society had never provided them. The guard who had given her the book was named Kess, the same young alien whose life Colonel Stone had saved months earlier. Kess had begun visiting Williams regularly, asking questions about human behavior that his own people couldn't answer. Today he seemed more troubled than usual, his bioluminescent patterns flickering with confused colors. "Dr. Williams, I have been reading your histories of something called the Underground Railroad," Kess said through the translator device. Humans helped other humans escape from slavery, even though it meant risking their own freedom and safety. "Why would they do this for strangers?" Williams looked up from her book, studying the young alien's face. His crystalline features were beautiful in an otherworldly way, but his eyes held the same curiosity she had seen in her human students over the years. because they recognized that slavery was wrong, regardless of what their laws said. They chose to follow their conscience instead of their government. But the escaped slaves could provide no benefit to those who helped them. Many of the helpers never saw the people they saved again. How does this behavior help the species survive? This was the question that had been troubling many of the younger Threnody soldiers. Their education had taught them that all behavior ultimately served selfish purposes, even when it appeared altruistic. Yet human history was filled with examples of people sacrificing everything for strangers who could never repay them. William set down her book and moved closer to the cell. Bars. Over the months of her imprisonment, she had developed an unexpected friendship with several of her guards. They were genuinely trying to understand humanity, and she found their questions both challenging and hopeful. Kes, let me ask you something. In your society, what happens to individuals who become sick or injured and cannot contribute to the group? They are provided with basic care until they recover or die, but they are not considered valuable members of society, Kes replied honestly. Resources spent on the weak reduce the strength of the whole. And what about your elderly? Those who are too old to work or fight? Kes's patterns dimmed slightly. They are honored for their past contributions, but they do not receive the same resources as productive citizens. This is logical and efficient. Williams nodded, understanding now why the aliens were so confused by human behavior. In human society, we believe that every person has value that goes beyond their immediate usefulness. We care for our sick and elderly not because it benefits us directly, but because we believe it's the right thing to do. This belief makes our entire society stronger. Before Kes could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the prison facility. Emergency lights flashed as guards rushed through the corridors, shouting orders in their musical language. Through her cell window, Williams could see explosions lighting up the night sky. The human resistance had found the prison and was mounting a rescue operation. But instead of the carefully planned extraction Williams might have expected, what she witnessed was something far more remarkable. Human fighters were risking their lives not just to rescue their own people, but to protect alien prisoners as well. She watched in amazement as human soldiers helped wounded Threnody guards reach safety, even while fighting to free their captured comrades. When part of the prison structure collapsed, human medics treated injured aliens alongside injured humans, making no distinction between friend and enemy. Young Kes stood frozen in the corridor, his weapon lowered as he watched humans he had been taught to see as primitives, displaying a form of moral sophistication his people had never developed. When a human soldier approached him, Kes expected to be shot or captured. Instead, the soldier simply asked if he was injured and needed medical attention. The rescue operation succeeded in freeing most of the human prisoners. But what happened next shocked both sides. Instead of retreating immediately, the human forces spent precious time ensuring that no alien personnel were trapped in the damaged sections of the building. They left behind medical supplies and food for the aliens who couldn't be evacuated. Most importantly, they left behind something that would change the course of the war, a data storage device containing detailed records of the Threnody Empire's previous conquests. The humans had been intercepting alien communications for months, slowly piecing together the truth about their enemy's history. Commander Thex reviewed the captured human intelligence with growing unease. The files contained not only military information but also detailed analyses of Threnody society, culture, and psychology. The humans understood their enemies better than the Threnody understood themselves, but the most damaging information was what the humans had learned about the Empire's past. They had documented every species the Threnody had exterminated over the past 3,000 years. 67 different civilizations, each with their own art, philosophy, technology, and way of understanding the universe, all of them erased. To clear the way for mining operations, Intelligence Officer Nira was called to review the human data files. As she read through the detailed records, her bioluminescent patterns shifted through a spectrum of emotions her people rarely experienced. The humans had not only learned about each destroyed species but had attempted to reconstruct their cultures and preserve their memory. They are mourning civilizations they never knew, she told Dex during their briefing. They have created memorials for extinct species they never met, written poetry about destroyed worlds they never visited. This level of empathy for strangers extends beyond their own species. Vex studied the human cultural reconstructions with confusion and something that might have been shame. His people had never bothered to learn about the civilizations they destroyed. They had simply catalogued them as obstacles to be removed, no different from clearing forests or draining swamps, but the humans saw each extinct species as an irreplaceable loss to the universe. They had tried to imagine what unique perspectives and knowledge had been lost forever. They grieved for strangers across time and space. The captured files also revealed something that terrified the Threnody leadership. The humans had been broadcasting their story across the galaxy using captured alien communication arrays. Every surviving civilization within 50 light-years now knew about the war on Earth and about the Empire's history of genocide. For the first time in 3 millennia, the Threnody Empire was facing not just military resistance but moral judgment. From the wider galaxy, species that had lived in fear of the Empire began to question whether their submission had been necessary or justified. On the front lines, the effect was even more immediate. Young Threnody soldiers who had grown up believing in their civilization's righteousness were confronted with evidence that they were part of a machine of systematic extinction. Many began refusing orders or requesting transfers away from combat duties. Kess was among the first to make a formal decision. After reading the human files and witnessing their behavior during the prison rescue, he approached his commanding officer and announced that he could no longer participate in the conquest of Earth. These humans have shown me what it means to value life beyond immediate utility, he told his shocked superiors. They have demonstrated moral principles that my people claim to possess but have never actually practiced. I cannot continue to serve an empire that destroys what it cannot understand. His defection triggered a cascade of similar decisions throughout the Threnody forces. Soldiers who had been questioning their mission found the courage to act on their doubts. Support personnel began sabotaging equipment rather than contributing to the extermination of a species they had come to respect. Most significantly, several Threnody scientists approached human research teams with offers to share advanced technology in exchange for the chance to study human social structures. They wanted to understand how a species could maintain compassion and cooperation while still achieving technological advancement. Dr. Williams found herself at the center of unprecedented cultural exchange as alien defectors sought to understand human philosophy and ethics. Her prison cell became a meeting place where two very different species tried to learn from each other. Your people have achieved something my civilization thought was impossible, Kess told her during one of their discussions. You have remained individuals while functioning as a collective organism. You compete with each other while still caring for each other. You are simultaneously the most violent and most compassionate species we have ever encountered. William smiled at the apparent contradiction that had confused the aliens from the beginning. We're not perfect, Kess. We make terrible mistakes and sometimes we let fear overcome our better nature. But we keep trying to do better, and we never stop believing that every life has value. As more Threnody soldiers defected and joined the growing resistance movement, Commander Thex realized that the war for Earth had become something far more dangerous than a simple conquest. It had become a battle for the soul of his entire civilization, and he was no longer certain which side was winning. The execution order arrived on Commander Thex's personal communication array, just as Earth's sun was rising over what remained of New York City. The message was brief and absolute. Commence total planetary sterilization. Eliminate all biological life. Mining operations to begin immediately upon completion. Thex stared at the glowing text while his command bridge buzzed with normal activity around him. After 8 months of war, the Threnody High Command had finally decided that Earth's resources weren't worth the continued resistance and cultural contamination spreading through their forces. Better to start over with a dead world than risk further exposure to human ideas. The sterilization fleet had arrived during the night. 12 massive ships equipped with weapons capable of burning away every living thing on the planet's surface. The technology was efficient and thorough, tested on dozens of previous worlds. Within 6 hours, Earth would be a sterile rock ready for mining equipment, but as Vex prepared to give the orders that would end human civilization forever, his door chimed with an unexpected visitor. Intelligence Officer Nira entered without. Waiting for permission, her bioluminescent patterns flashing urgent red warnings. "Commander, I must speak with you about the sterilization order," she said, her voice carrying an emotional intensity that was unusual for their species. Vex gestured for her to approach his command desk. Over the months of this campaign, Nira had become increasingly troubled by her observations of human behavior. Her reports had grown longer and more philosophical, filled with questions that had no answers in Threnody science. "The order is clear and comes directly from the High Command," Vex replied. "We have 6 hours to evacuate all personnel before the sterilization begins." Nira activated her personal datapad and began displaying the intelligence she had gathered over the past month. "Commander, before we proceed, you need to see what our forces have discovered about the consequences of our previous campaigns." The holographic display showed star charts marking every world the Empire had sterilized over the past 3 millennia. But now the charts included additional data that had never been compiled before, reconstructions of what those civilizations might have contributed to galactic knowledge and culture. "The humans forced us to ask questions we never considered," Nira explained as the display shifted through detailed analyses. What if the Corvani had developed medical technologies that could have saved millions of lives? What if the Zithari had created art forms that would have inspired countless other species? What if any of the 67 civilizations we destroyed had discoveries that could have benefited everyone? Vex studied the projections with growing discomfort. His people had always justified their conquests as necessary for galactic order and efficiency. They had never considered what might have been lost forever when they silenced other voices in the universe. "These are hypothetical scenarios based on incomplete data," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Are they?" Nira challenged, displaying footage from the human resistance networks. "Look at what humans have accomplished in just 8 months of war. They've reverse-engineered our technology, developed new fighting techniques, and created levels of international cooperation that their species had never achieved before. They did this while under constant attack, while losing millions of their people while facing extinction." The footage showed human scientists working alongside Threnody, defectors to develop hybrid technologies that neither species could have created alone. Medical teams had developed treatments for injuries that affected both humans and aliens. Artists from both worlds were creating new forms of expression that transcended species barriers. "Imagine what they might contribute to galactic civilization if given the chance to develop freely," Nira continued. "Imagine what all those destroyed species might have contributed if we had chosen cooperation over conquest." Before Vex could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. His communications officer announced that multiple Threnody vessels in the sterilization fleet were refusing to acknowledge orders. Some ships were powering down their weapons, while others were moving to defensive positions around the planet, rather than attack formations. The mutiny had begun, led by officers who had served in ground operations and witnessed human behavior firsthand. Young soldiers who had been saved by human medics, commanders who had seen humans protect alien prisoners, scientists who had worked with human researchers, all of them were refusing to participate in genocide. Captain Vel, commander of the sterilization ship Eternal Order, appeared on the main communication screen. His bioluminescent patterns showed the deep purple of absolute determination as he addressed the fleet. "I have served the Empire for 40 years and participated in 17 planetary clearings," Vel announced. "But I cannot and will not exterminate a species that has shown me what true civilization looks like. Any ship that attempts to fire on Earth will be considered an enemy of all intelligent life." Half the sterilization fleet immediately signaled their agreement with Vel's declaration. The other half prepared for combat, their weapons turning toward the rebel ships rather than The planet below. The Empire's most powerful fleet was about to tear itself apart in Earth's orbit. On the planet's surface, humans and alien defectors worked together to coordinate whatever defense they could manage. General Adams found himself commanding a mixed force of human military units and Threnody soldiers who had chosen to protect Earth rather than destroy it. "This is unprecedented in galactic history," reported Dr. Williams from the Joint Human-Alien Research Facility. "We have members of the conquering species fighting to protect the conquered world. It suggests that moral principles can transcend species loyalty when individuals are exposed to different ways of thinking." The battle in space began with tragic intensity as Threnody. Ships that had fought side by side for centuries now turned their weapons on each other. The Empire's rigid hierarchy was collapsing as individual officers made personal choices about right and wrong. Commander Thex watched the destruction with growing horror. His own ship was being targeted by both sides. The Loyalists wanted him to join the sterilization effort, while the rebels demanded that he protect Earth. The decision he made in the next few minutes would determine not only the fate of humanity, but the future of his entire civilization. Young Kess appeared on his bridge without authorization, having abandoned his post to make a personal appeal to his commander. The guard who had once been saved by a human prisoner now stood before his superior officer with courage that would have been impossible under the old system. "Commander Thex, I know you have always served the Empire with honor," Kess said, his patterns showing respectful determination. "But honor means different things now than it did before we met the humans. True honor means protecting life, not destroying it." Vex looked around his bridge at officers who had served under him for years. Many of them were showing the same conflicted patterns as Kess, torn between loyalty to the Empire and newfound understanding of moral responsibility. Intelligence Officer Nira stepped forward with final piece of evidence. "Commander, the humans have sent a message to the entire galaxy. Every species within communication range now knows what is happening here. If we proceed with sterilization, the Empire will be remembered forever as the civilization that destroyed the most compassionate species the galaxy had ever produced." The message was simple but devastating. Humans had broadcast recordings of Threnody soldiers being cared for in human hospitals, alien children playing with human children in refugee camps, and defectors working alongside their former enemies to build something better than either species had achieved alone. Vex realized that regardless of what happened in the next few hours, the Empire as he had known it was already dead. The rigid hierarchy that had controlled galactic civilization for 3 millennia was crumbling as individuals across dozens of species began questioning authority and making personal moral choices. He could order the sterilization and be remembered as a monster, or he could choose a different path and help create something unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest. The commander's decision came not as a grand gesture but as a quiet order to his weapons officer: "Stand down all offensive systems and signal the fleet to cease hostilities." Within hours, the word spread across the galaxy that the Threnody Empire had ended its conquest of Earth, but more than that, it had begun the process of transforming itself into something that had never existed before, a galactic community where different species worked together as equals. The war had ended not with humanity's victory over the aliens, but with both species discovering that their greatest strength lay not in their ability to destroy their enemies, but in their capacity to transform those enemies into friends. In the months that followed, former battlefields became construction sites where humans and Threnody worked together to rebuild what had been destroyed. Schools were established where children of both species learned not just science and mathematics, but philosophy and ethics that would help them create a better galaxy. Commander Thex, now serving as an ambassador rather than a military leader, often visited these schools, watching human and alien children play together, solving problems through cooperation rather than conflict. He understood what his species had been missing for 3,000 years. They had conquered the galaxy, but had never learned to truly live in it. The humans, despite their primitive technology and short lives, had achieved something far more valuable than galactic dominance. They had learned how to care for each other and for strangers across the vast darkness of space. The greatest victory in the war for Earth had not been won by weapons or technology, but by the simple human refusal to stop believing that every life had value, even the lives of those who came to destroy them.